Hey guys, welcome back to Sierra's Substack, and we have a very special guest today. We are going to be covering the final hostage return from Gaza back to Israel. And so we have Doron Keidar joining us. I hope I pronounced that right. Joining us today. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, a little bit about myself. I guess currently I'm the military guy and unofficial spokesperson for the Israeli forces that have been fighting in Gaza. And I say that kind of jokingly, but it's become kind of my reality since the war broke out on October 7, the current war that we've been fighting now for over 800 days. Um, what I notice is this trend that the international community, the world, basically started to demonize us, to make all kinds of crazy claims, and forget the fact that guys like me are normal people who used to have a job, who used to have a living, who used to have, which my profession is executive protection. I've been performing protection for some of the top individuals in the world, some of the most wealthiest people, most powerful people in the world here when they visit Israel. And I went from doing that to having to go and fight a war that I didn't call for, that I didn't ask for. And we literally, this is one of the most justifiable wars, to my knowledge, that Israel's fought in as far as the history of the wars that we've had, like no question about it. Yet, to our shock, literally on October 8th, there were protests globally, protesting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, in support of uh, the Gazans, in support of the those that invaded. And when I say invaded, we're talking about over 7,000 terrorists entered Israel from the Gaza Strip and carried out a murderous rampage. And so when seeing that crazy, weird phenomenon of taking the side of these psychopaths and having posts, social posts from was it Black Lives Matter, with a picture of a guy on a glider, which is what one of the terrorists use, saying "We stand with Palestine" or something along those lines, and whatever. It was just, it was getting out of hand, and I felt that it was important for me, as the person who's on the front lines in this war with my unit, being a sergeant major in Israel's uh, reserve special forces unit, and literally being on the front lines of this war. I felt it was important that we tell our story and that others don't dictate to us our narrative. So, kind of sum her up a little bit, that's kind of been the who I am, and why I say it's an unofficial, because I don't work for the Israeli spokesperson's department of the IDF. I don't work for the Israeli government. I work for myself and for my fellow soldiers that are on the front lines with me, and I'm doing my best to tell our story. Is really what I've kind of taken upon myself in the past 2 years.
Wow. I mean, that is so great, that you've been able to kind of step into that role, although the circumstances are not great that led you to that. But
Yeah.
yeah, but it's really, as you said, we've had so much disinformation about this war just from the very beginning. It's shocking to me actually when you said on October 8th, there were already protests. I mean, how did that even happen? It doesn't make it feel very organic. Um, but
Yeah.
now we're kind of on the other side of it, and we're at the end where they finally got this last hostage back. So I guess first, just tell us, how do you feel? How do the guys that you're talking to that have been out there fighting this for so long, are they feeling a sense of relief to finally see this last hostage home?
100%. In fact, just today, I got back just fresh, about 20 minutes ago. I got back home here from doing a tour with a US journalist, and you'll find out about him later. I'm not going to have to name drop the individual, but let's just say this is somebody who's a very well-known, credited journalist, who had the spine to come here and to physically come and see firsthand and to eyewitness. And friends, mutual friends of ours, connected us and said you should go with Doron, because he's been fighting in this war, and he can he can do his part to give you the front lines experience and reality. So we started actually at the police academy here in Israel, and they have collected and documented the data from these past 2 years, and they're still actually working on collecting more. And it's kind of hard to even think about this, but there's just so much that's happened that we're still processing through the data of what happened, what took place, exactly where. And what that means is we have to interview each and every individual that's been in every area of conflict and in incidences and whatnot. And the gentleman that we met with was a wealth of knowledge because he gave this journalist and me, who was in this, fighting in this war, but I didn't have the data. I played my part, my little cog in the wheel of the war, and people just think I'm supposed to know everything. I don't. I'm a cog in the wheel, just like every war fighter and non-war fighter, supportive element that's been fighting and helping us. We only have a certain picture. And so this gave me a real perspective of what we were up against on October 7th. I said, oh, that makes sense when I'm seeing this map with the data. I'm going, that's why we encountered this, my experience on the battlefield.
Mm,
And so it gave a great perspective for me as the warfighter who was in the isolated incidences in the big picture. It gave this journalist the big picture when then later we went to the Gaza Strip and literally went right up to the fence. And when you come with a humility and when you come with an honest, I want to cover the reality, the acceptance and the open sharing that you get from the Israelis is incredible. And so again, this police officer, that's his job, to crunch these numbers and to share them. But these soldiers that we met at the border, as you're asking, the fresh off the press just recently, a few hours ago, they're telling me like, yeah, this is crazy. It's such a new reality. The
wow.
last hostage is home, and you can tell they're elated, and they're saying, now we hope. I talked to this young man who made immigration from Argentina, by the way, was the one soldier, and I said, how many days have you done of service? He said 600 days and counting. I said, man, I take my hat off to you because we've only done like close to 500, and so you've done like over 100 days more plus of reserve duty, and it's so inspiring to me to see the Israeli people and the soldiers are have put up with a lot, and we're carrying years of scars, of trauma, of both what happened on October and what happened after, which was a constant fight to get back our hostages. And
Right.
my team was one of those units that worked very hard, and we were able to achieve, to my knowledge, it might be more, I don't know, but last count I heard and remember and recall was that we got 8 hostages back outside of the negotiations through
Wow.
through specific missions. I can't go into detail, but what I can tell you is to us, every human that got back, every Israeli that got back, to have an honorable burial and to have closure for their family, it was a feeling of elation and relief because for us, no man left behind is not just a motto. It's no brother left behind, no sister left behind. To us, Israel is a big family. We're not like other countries in the world, where you have different ethnos groups in a country, if it's Italian or French or whatever, and we're all American. It's like, yes, we're all Jews, but we're not all Jews in the state of Israel. We have Druze, we have Bedouins, and that's part of who was held in Gaza as hostage, by the way. It was a mixed batch of the society of Israel. And for me as a warfighter, we went to go get our brothers, irregardless if they being part of the Jewish family or not, they're part of Israel. And for us, there's a term in Hebrew, it says, Kulanu arevim ze leze. We are all responsible for each other is a hard way to like a really rough translation, but it gives this collective whole kind of a feeling and responsibility that we have for each other. And that's what you felt. That was the sentiment of relief when the last hostage was finally released. By the way, not because Hamas handed him over like some of the reporters reported. It was because of the IDF special mission to locate his body. And we had indication, if I remember correctly, it was something like close to 700 grave sites that this special mission started digging up. And it was only after the 250th grave site did they hit bingo and get a positive ID on the fallen warfighter.
Wow. I mean,
So,
that is
so
just a
yeah,
terrible
yeah.
experience for everyone involved, I'm sure.
Yes. So can you imagine those men and women that were out there and that were part of that mission and just the grueling task of handling all these bodies, which by the way, most of these bodies that they handled were Palestinians that were buried. Because what happened with this individual, who by the way was an Israeli police officer who was off duty, who was injured through his occupation. And so he was basically on medical leave. He didn't have to go and engage with the terrorists on October 7th. And his family said, hey, you don't have, they told him, but you're injured. He said, I am not going to let my brothers and sisters go in and fight these terrorists alone. I'm going to fight with them. And that was his last message to his family as he went out bravely, injured, and killed 15 terrorists until they finally killed him. And what happened was because he was in uniform and got and it got all messed up or what have you. To my understanding, in the chaos of all of that, they mixed him and his identity with one of the terrorist, fallen terrorist operatives, and so they assumed I guess because I'm not, it's not very clear to me, but that's just the first report I heard is why they buried him in the Palestinian burial graveyard area and not basically holding him with other hostage bodies and whatever that were being held in different places and hidden. So this was actually a real kind of one of those odd mistakes that happened, lost an identity, and they buried him in a mass gravesite with a bunch of other Palestinians
Wow.
that were buried there. And that's what led to this very long process of getting to the last hostage, which the intelligence community was able to break and get a lead on that not too long ago. And that's why we finally were able to know more or less where he was at. And then, like I said, it was a grueling task even to get to the needle in the haystack within, we know the haystack, but where in the haystack?
Right.
Um, so crazy circumstances, but again, to me, I see that as a miracle and a blessing from God that gave us this opportunity to get the intel A and to bring closure to the family of literally a fallen hero
Yeah.
of the officers that went and fought because they were the ones that held the line on October 7th, with all credit given to them and due to them, which is actually why I started my tour with my guest journalist with the police academy to get their perspective of what they did, because to me, they're the real heroes of October 7th. Again, it's not taking away any credit from the IDF and others and individual civilians that actually stepped up to the plate and fought to help their fellow man. But the police really, really did an incredible job to hold that line that saved millions of Israeli, I don't know millions, but tens of thousands of Israeli lives that the terrorists would have ended up going to if it were Ashkelon, Tel Aviv, and other higher populated areas that they were planning to target.
Well, and I think that's something that we didn't see a lot of coverage on, at least, in the US or globally, is like what was happening in that very moment. And these first responders in Israel, we were hearing about it in the terms of a war that
Mm.
was had built up later on. So that's as you said, starting with the police is actually a good perspective to gain that very first moments of what was happening. Now,
It's like in 9/11. We talk about the firefighters and we highlight them for 9/11 for America, right? They're the heroes of 9/11. It's a similar equivalent, except that in this case, it happens to be these police officers.
wow, that's really an interesting, yeah, the perspective on that. I can see what you're saying there, definitely.
Yeah.
Now, President Trump has obviously, been working on this as well, and he posted on Truth Social, just recovered the last hostage body in Gaza, thus got back all 20 of the living hostages and all of the dead. Amazing job. And what we've seen from him since then, that was, I believe, on Monday, is, there's been some very high level meetings between the White House and the Israeli government, more talks about the second phase in Gaza. So, can you give us a little bit of insight with your experience of being in Gaza? What is this second phase supposed to look like? Is it realistic to be able to disarm Hamas? Again, that seems to be something that is falling to the IDF, as you pointed out. The Hamas did not do the recovery of the hostage themselves, and they're not really doing the disarming themselves either.
That's your point exactly. That I mean, you nailed it. The Hamas has not honored the agreement between Israel and Hamas that the United States has been trying to broker and through Qatar and other players, et cetera, right? And I will put it very plainly, and again, it's no offense to United States, to the President of the United States and the policymakers there, but with all due respect, I believe that your leadership is very naive to the reality that we're up against here. I mean, to put it as bluntly and simply as possible, Israel and the conflict with our neighbors has nothing to do with treaties and peace and disarmaments and whatever. This isn't like World War II, where you defeated your enemies and they laid down their arms and you had the Nuremberg trials and right? And we had justice and we had peace afterwards. That's kind of the unfortunate, like bittersweet end to this very long 2+ year war that we've been in. Is yes, we're relieved. Like I said, our hostages are back home. The families have either mourn or rejoice with the living hostages that they get back and they get closure. But as far as because there was two objectives for us. I don't care what America has to say. The question is what is good for Israel, right? So for us, number one was return every one of our hostages back home. Number two, and actually three, but number two is to disarm and dismantle Hamas. And then number three, if you like, if not technically number two, all that serving the most important thing is restoring peace and security for the Gaza envelope communities, the Israeli communities along the Gaza borders. So those two are hanging in the air right now.
Mm.
I can tell you right now from visiting the my friends that live in the southern communities and visiting the soldiers there, that is weighing heavily on the back of their mind. Am I going to get to go back to normal? Are we going to get back normal, meaning go back to my life and ending unending extended reserve duties that seem to never end here? Do I get to go back to my work, to my family, and whatever every person this war caught them in the middle of, and basically get on with life as usual? And the answer to me is in the immediate, like in the now, in the very near future. No, absolutely not, because Hamas has not disarmed. Hamas, if anything, during this so-called peace, relative peace, which by the way, during this period that's supposed to be a peaceful disarming and ending of the conflict and us pulling out all of our forces outside of the heart of Gaza and going to the yellow line, which is a buffer, a defensive line between Israel and Gaza. The Hamas terrorists were actively attacking IDF posts. They were defending this line daily,
Wow.
daily trying to either kill soldiers, and they have killed soldiers, by the way. But what they've been unsuccessful with is kidnapping soldiers so they can get back to square one with hostages. So that's
Wow.
happened during this period that Trump so-called brokered a peace deal. And so what I'm saying is that's an absolute sham. Are you trying to say that I'm stupid? Do you think that we're ignorant? Do you think that we're naive? That is this acceptable to you as Americans or Europeans? That you have an actual threat that's still active against your own people, and you're not going to take a military measure against it to annihilate that threat. So it's very naive. It's very stupid, in my opinion. I know I'm using hard terms for Americans, but sometimes you kind of have to hear the hard truth. You need to get it into our psyche that this is really absurd. It's beyond absurd. You're expecting for a tiger to change his stripes. Terrorists terrorize, and they have a charter, and the charter says from the river to the sea, which these idiots, enablers in all around the world from October 8th and on have been chanting on the streets all over the world, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Yes, Judenrein, that is the Hamas charter that these idiots are chanting in absolute ignorance to even the context of what it means. That's their objective. Do you really think they've changed the objective because the IDF has militarily destroyed the leadership and not most of the tunnel, because we have roughly 600 miles of terror tunnel systems. That's massive in a 42-kilometer landmass by 12 at the widest.
Okay.
So for anybody who wants to do the math, it's insane.
Yeah.
It's an insane labyrinth of terror tunnels. And do you really think that we're done in just 2 years? Yeah, no. So for me, the answer and solution, if you want to have an honest one, is that we need to relocate the Gazans out of Gaza to the Arab neighbors. Plain and simple. Why? Because you have forfeited your right to be a good neighbor. Because the collective whole, and yes, it is a collective punishment to all the Gazans, and they are deserving of the collective punishment. Because on October 7th, for those who didn't understand, it was about 3,000 or so Gaza terrorist operatives, Nukhba, Hamas, and other terrorist groups that carried out the planned attack. Hours into the attack, they were sending messages into Gaza to the civilians. The Yahud, the Zionists have fallen. Come and join us, brothers. Come and plumage, rape, murder, and kill. Join us. So the collective whole was 7,000 plus minus Gazans that entered and joined in it. So actually it was more civilian, so-called civilians, if you want to call it that joined in because they heard the cry of, hey, we're winning, we're defeating, and yes, you didn't get trained and you didn't get equipped or whatever to be a terrorist. But do you understand it's like in their DNA, so to speak, because unfortunately they've been brainwashed from childhood to believe that this is the way. And the only way is when there's no Jews in all from the river to the sea, meaning all of Israel. That's their objective. And so that's from the terrorists to the people. So you've all forfeited your right. Does that mean that there's going to be collective punishment to Gazans who never supported Hamas, never wanted to support Hamas, reluctantly did it because they didn't want to be murdered or tortured or all the evil things that happen to those who don't toe the line? Yes. But you know what? It's not my fault that Germany or Japan had a collective punishment for crazies that led those nations into a war that incurred millions of people to be murdered and killed in battlefields, etc., and the absolute carnage that took place because of that, of the ramifications of that. So to me, yeah, that is the price that I think is worthy, because they do not belong here. It's because you need to understand too, the Gaza Strip is so much within Israel that is so difficult for us, and the price is too high for us, for me, my men and women of the state of Israel to defend our border against these crazies, that I'm like, you know what? No, no. For us, the price is too high because it is an impossible, non-ending cycle of violence to do it the way we've been doing it. So again, what is insanity? It's repeating the same stupidity over and over and over. And that's all I'm hearing from these politicians. So why don't you try something new? And yes, it's not popular. You're not going to get votes for it, but it's the right thing to do. It's to cut out the cancer when the cancer is basically uncontainable. And that's what the Gaza Strip has become. And all of that falls on Hamas. They created this culture of death and wanting death over life for their people. Well, now to me, then the payment or the ramifications of that is, well, you forfeited your right to be here, and good luck to the Arab world where you came from. Because anyways, most of these Arabs that live there, they're not Palestinian. There isn't such a thing. It's fictitious. The Arabs that live there, most of them are Egyptian, they're Jordanian, they're from Sudan, they're from Iraq, they're from all over the Arab Middle East, including the Arabs in Judea and Samaria as well, also known as the West Bank. So, so technically, this isn't a big punishment. Where all we're saying is go back home to where you came from. We as Israelis don't want you in our country. It's the same
Well,
that you would do to illegal immigrants that would act in the same manner against the best interests of good Americans who are upstanding citizens and paying taxes and so on, etc. Right? It's the same equivalent.
Well, I do agree with your point that, this border, that having this border with this very contentious group of Hamas right on the border, it's leading to a cycle of violence, and it's been ongoing for decades. And of course, October 7th was this really horrible example of that, but it's not the only one. And then you have the issue with the response and the way that Israel, has to go in. And then there are civilian deaths, because of, as you said, all this tunnel networks and the small, narrow strip, just the geography of it. So it's definitely, like you said, maybe it's time to be open to some new creative solutions, or just looking at it from a different perspective, because it seems like there is just never-ending violence for both
Yeah.
civilian populations on both sides of the
Exactly.
border. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And the only difference is we don't teach our civilians to murder and kill innocent people and to hate the other. One of the beautiful examples of that, because the reporter that I was with spoke to this young Israeli soldier woman who's a reservist, and she was very generous and kind to show him around and explain to him and their mission and what they're doing. And then she said, after she was done doing the official, like, this is, what we're dealing with, she then got personal with him and said, one of my best friends was murdered and tortured and killed on October 7th at the Nova Festival. And she said, for me to do, basically, she was explaining the reason why I'm doing my reserve duty, because technically a lot of women are exempt. There's a lot of minorities that can get exempt. There's a lot of people that can find good reasons not to do reserve duty and get out of it. But what happened is that October 7th affected all of the people of Israel and all of the population of the people of Israel that live here, because the casualties on October 7th was on that level. And and she said, and so then I asked her, I said, because I knew he wouldn't ask the question. He wasn't going to be so harsh, so to speak. But I said, I want to prove a point here. I don't know her from Adam. And I said, but I know the Israeli spirit. I know how we think. I said, after what they did to your friend, would you wish the same to be done to them? I didn't say from us. I said, would you wish the same to be done to them? Basically, hypothetically, by whoever. She goes, absolutely not. She said, absolutely not. She said, the Jewish spirit and what we're taught in schools here in Israel is that love thy neighbor as yourself, or rather treat your neighbor as you would want to be treated. Was what came out of this young woman's mouth. She's not a religious girl. She's not, to my knowledge, at least, yeah, at least from external appearances. And I thought to myself, see, that's the Jewish spirit, or really what's become the Israel spirit, because a lot of the Judeo values that is embedded into our educational system and our schools, it is part of the DNA of Israelis now. You'll have Druze people, and you'll have Arab Christians and even Muslims that will share these same values and say, I agree with that, because you know what? The Bible and the biblical principles of how we treat our neighbor, which is the first time, by the way, in history that we had rules of laws and how to treat the other, right? Because up until the Bible was written, actually, there wasn't such a code of morality, so to speak, towards each other and whatever. And that's part of the Israeli DNA. It's that we have collectively have this mindset of we treat each other. So if you're a Muslim here, or a Christian here, or a Jewish individual here, and all the other minorities that live here, we all know that we treat each other the way we want to be treated for
Mhm.
the ones who have a moral compass, if you like, right? And it's the extremists from all our groups who want to pull away from that. So those are the exceptions. Because people say, well, what about it? What about? Yes, I know the what about. I know all about the what about. But let me tell you, we just met, like I said, some girl I don't know from Adam, and a few other soldiers there, and each one of them were sharing the same thing. And I'm like, isn't that interesting to the journalist? I said, isn't that interesting, right? Like you just heard her tell and share one of the worst traumas that she's been through in her young life. And you would think, yeah, I want those pigs to pay, right? Would be the attitude. You would expect that to come out of her mouth. She goes, no, I don't want that on them. And instead, understanding that the sad reality, because she's also not naive, and that's the part I think in the West you do have. She says, the sad truth is, though, I know they're being taught different than us. And
Mhm.
she said, what I wish is for their children to grow up in Israeli society and in our way of education
Mhm.
that is counter to the brainwashing they've been had. Because she said, I don't believe the children have that in their hearts.
Mhm.
It's the way they've been educated. And she said, that's what breaks my heart
Yeah.
in how they grew up there, which is what led to my statement about that really is the crux of the problem here.
Yeah.
And to think that you're going to build them was it beachfront property, villas and hotels, and make a Dubai of the Middle East, and somehow they're going to drop their arms and not resort to violence anymore. Mr. Trump, this is not a pragmatic business deal that you're used to doing globally around the world. These are Islamists. It's an ideology that is very, very, very lethal, and it operates on so many levels that contradict the way you and I think. It contradicts the Judeo-Christian values. It contradicts most of the values of most religions around the world, which is why you have Muslims persecuting Buddhists and others all over the world. And again, people are not going to like to hear this, but it's the Islamists who are the ones who are inciting their Muslim population to believe that it is right to lie to thy neighbor, to
Mhm.
steal from thy neighbor, to take advantage of thy neighbor. This is within their code of law, which unfortunately people like Tucker Carlson seem to say is such a wonderful, peaceful culture. And I don't understand why people have a problem with Islam. Because in Islam, like I see here in Qatar, you don't have prostitution, you don't have bars and alcoholics that are drunk on the streets, and you have peace and you have civility and all this stuff. And I go, yeah, Tucker, that's right. Do you know how they achieve it though? You steal, they cut your hand off. That's Sharia. That's Quranic Islamist ideology. And let me tell you, most Muslims do not want that. That is why in most Muslim countries, you don't have actual Sharia law as the law of the land. By the way, here's another revelation for Mr. Tucker and his crowd of ignorant fools who try to sell this idea that people like me who say this is a problem and say, no, it's not. It's a peaceful, wonderful, great society. Really? Then why is it? Let's look at statistics, not what Doron is saying, that every war in the world, either both sides are Muslim or one side of the conflict is Muslim.
Mm.
And you can check me on this. And that's like over 90% of the wars in the world, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm gonna be a conservative, give you a conservative, I'll pull back a little bit. I'm not gonna say 100%, but literally, that is our reality.
Yeah.
And so you're dealing with a demonic ideology, and that's what the Nazis had, and they mixed it with Christianity. So it's not an attack on Christianity, and it's not an attack on good Muslims, because praise God, the majority of Muslims are good people like you and me, and they want good things like you and me. It's the Islamists and the extremists. They are the problem, and they need to be rooted out. And Islam as a whole actually need to reform their own faith. And
Mhm.
yes, I said that because it does preach jihadist teaching within the Quran. And people say, well, so is the Bible. How many Christians carry out suicide attacks? How many Jews have you heard who are terrorists? Just name me one, and we can, and you've disproved my point, you know? And again, I can name one or two, by the way, because I know of them. and they are the exception to the rule, and they are ousted from our community.
Hmm.
That's the difference.
Right.
So I'm challenging the Muslims, is what I'm doing.
Hmm.
The good Muslim community, the good Muslim world. You guys need to deal with the Islamists and you need to attack them. You need to tear them down. You need to deplatform them.
Yeah.
Do not give them place in society because you know better than I do. The worst of it isn't for me, right? Because I live in a free society. It's you who live under that. You're the ones who know better than I do how dementive this is and
Yeah.
terrible for society.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. Like you said, the dangerous elements, the extremist elements, and just the risk that you take when you encourage that in your society. And I think, in the West and in Israel and in the US, to some extent, at least, we try to tamp down that rather than just let it go or encourage it.
It's whitewashing, is what it is.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'll give you an example. Do you remember? This shook me. This shook me. And this is what my point of like in the West, you need to wake up. You need to wake up. I was in the United States studying at college during October 7th. Sorry, during 9/11, my bad. So on 9/11, I remember it very well. I woke up to the horrors that we all woke up to. And then I remember a few days later, the President of the United States and faith leaders. We had Billy Graham and others, if you recall, collectively came together and each one gave a speech and everyone talked and discussed and whatever. None of the leaders of America, either religious leaders like Billy Graham and or the President of the United States, called out radical Islam. They did not confront it. And what they all kept saying is, we all know that Islam is a religion of peace. We all know that da 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 da, and that these terrible men and what they did has nothing to do with really, really, really. That's your response. These guys said Allahu Akbar. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah, it
it,
was very
I'll give
naive.
you.
Yeah.
It is. I'll give you the contrast. Do you know what Jews say? Religious Jews say when they die or when they're facing imminent death. You know what their last words are? In contrast to Allahu Akbar.
No, what is it?
Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You will hear the heroes who have died in battle and had the chance to say their last words. This is what their last recorded words is. They said, Shema Israel, and they screamed as they're laying on a grenade to protect their friends.
Wow. How all of these extremist forces and, encouraging how Islam and certain countries are encouraging these extremist forces. And that kind of brings me to Iran because, well, I have two questions about Iran. But the first one is that you know, they are, the regime is deploying all of these terrorist forces from Iraq and all of these different
Mhm.
places that they're terrorist proxies, and they're deploying them onto their own people. And in my view, that is a very big miscalculation because once these forces are unleashed, they're not going to control them.
Um, yes and no, because quite frankly, those are the proxies that they have prompted up for years to fight for their ideology, which is their version of the caliphate for world Islamic dominance. Because that's one thing that people need to understand within Islam. It's a little similar, I guess, maybe to Catholicism, that the Pope is the supreme leader, if you like, for the Catholics. Um, and so the difference is, though, that within Islam, you have different spiritual supreme leaders that were the successors, if you like, of Muhammad. And that's where the big controversy within the Islamic world is. And Iran is the Sunni, sorry, the Shia sect, whereas the rest, which is the minority, whereas the majority of the Islamic world is the Sunni. And so what Iran is trying to do through their proxies all throughout the Middle East and globally is to push for their version of the world caliphate, which they want to take to rule from there, right? Turkey has the same aspirations, by the way, with the new leader. I don't mean the Turkish people, to be clear, just like I don't mean the Iranian people. We're talking about the regime in Iran, and we're talking about the regime in Turkey. Yes, the regime in Turkey. Erdogan is a yeah, he is a fanatical maniac who is trying to revive the golden age of the Turkish Empire and have his caliphate from Turkey. And so that's essentially the the power play within the Islamic world, because it's not just Arab, but it's many ethnos. Um, but it did originate in Arabia and in the Arab Peninsula here. Um, and and so you have these power plays, right? And so that's what Iran's been doing. They've been prompting or building and creating these different groups. If it's Hezbollah to attack us and to attack and to create terror and chaos in Lebanon, if it's their proxies in Syria and their proxies all over the Middle East. So they have that. And so in a way, it's kind of like it's a, these guys owe the Iranian regime all the funding and all the training and everything they got. So really, it's they're bringing in their friends. The problem is that they're not bringing in the Iranian people's friends, right? And that should show you that the regime is truly a regime that does not belong there. They are external influences. They're not representing the Iranian people at all. Who, for example, can you imagine President Trump bringing in uh, um, Russians to come and create law and order in America that is uprising against him? Hypothetical, right? That would be
That wouldn't
insane,
work.
right? It wouldn't work, would it? Right? In a way, that's what Iran's done. But it's again, we're talking about years of building up these groups to be their proxies, and now they're paying back Iran the regime the favor. So it doesn't bother it does to my knowledge. Again, I could be completely wrong on this assessment, but to my knowledge, it's not going to affect the regime in any way. In fact, it's going to be the opposite. It's going to only strengthen their cracking down on the people of Iran that have been protesting against the regime. And here's again a sad note to this is where is America? Where is the United Nations? Where are the European nations? Where is England? Where is France? Where are all of these nations that have bleeding hearts for the poor Palestinians or the poor Sudanese or the poor, whatever the cause has been, the populist cause in the hour of that it was cool and interesting because the media portrayed it and you went and hugged a child or did your little PR stunt. These are real people that have a real opportunity to break free from this regime. What are we doing to help them? If anybody ever needed help, Israel never needed the world's help. Let's just be clear on that during our war, right? So we didn't need your help. They need your help. Why aren't you helping them? Oh, and you want another shame on the international community? Why was Israel the only military in the world that intervened with the slaughter that was happening in Syria? Because our conscience wouldn't allow us to be a good neighbor to stand by and watch this happen literally just a few hundred kilometers from us. It's insane. So the IDF took action. How come no one else did? To the shame of the world, to the shame of the world, and to the Gretas and all of these human rights, activists.
People, Greta and all these people just don't really know what human rights are because whenever there's a real human rights violation, they're nowhere to be
And
found.
what about Tucker and Candace and Fuentes and all of these, Christian rights people? You talked about persecution of Christians in the Middle East, and you did a whole piece on, in specific, who are being persecuted in Israel. And you interviewed Christians from Bethlehem who are under Palestinian control, not Israel. And you sold this story to the world that here they're being persecuted in the only place where Christians are being protected. I know this firsthand because guess what, Tucker? You didn't interview me. You didn't interview the man you should be interviewing is Ihab Shalian or any of the people that he is representing in Israel as a Christian Israeli fighting for Christian Israeli rights. And I, as a Jew, is standing shoulder to shoulder fighting for my Christian neighbors and their rights in Israel. That's the reality. And so, what about the Christians in Syria? What about the Christians in Iran that has one of the largest underground churches in the world? Why are you guys silent? Why am I raising their voice? Why did I have two Iranians on my podcast? Well, actually, one was an Iranian, the other one is Iranian Jew. So to be clear, my bad. But I had an Iranian woman who was persecuted by the Iranian regime. Her husband was murdered and killed by the Iranian regime, and she fled by miracle because she converted to Christianity. And the other one was actually a former Israeli Mossad in Iran as a, you know, but in any case, but both of them were focusing on this subject. So in other words, I care more about it than these people do, and somehow they gaslight everybody in America, saying people like me are the bad people. People like me are the people that or his fellow Christian. It should be fellow Christian Zionists because they're Christian at the end of the day. Because they're Zionists, he says, nope, those I won't talk with. Are you insane? So because the
Yeah,
person
free
has a different
speech, Tucker.
ideology than you, so I'm just calling out these people because people, again, use your common sense. Look around. Look at these insane people that you're following. Yes, they have a big following. I don't care. I don't follow the crowd. I follow truth. And where truth leads me is where I go. That's my personal internal compass. And I suggest the rest of us start using it and quit following these people. Oh, it must be true because everybody's saying it. No, not everybody's saying it. It's a few people who have Qatari foreign invaders money to propagate you, and they are sellouts to the American people. I'm more American patriot than they are. That flag that you see over here, yeah, it's over here. That's my father's flag who fought World War II. He's an American patriot, and my whole family are. I'm the only one who is, besides my brother, are the only ones that were born and raised in Israel. So we have a duality, if you like, in our love for these two countries. But ironically, I am more patriotic than these so-called America First people, and it makes me sick to my stomach that they will try to shame people like us because we fight for Israel, and they say they're dragging America into forever wars. Have you ever fought in these 2 years? Any American soldiers fought here? No. There were a few that were deployed here for the stupid botched flotilla thing that under Biden's administration that I watched, and I actually reported from the beaches there because I happened to be operating in that vicinity. And I'm like, U.S. service members died because of that botched mission.
That was just
And
terrible.
that was your big, yeah. And it did not serve us. It was to serve the Gazans, giving them humanitarian aid in the most awkward, most, yeah, messed up way. Why? Because it was all to spite Israel, because we're not going to use Israel. We're not going to use the ports in Ashdod and in Ashkelon. They are working, they're operating. So it's to smite and to spite us in your ignorance and in your pride. And look what you did. It's service members, the ones who were deployed, they're not, however you want to look at it, but they weren't here for us. They weren't here for the IDF. They weren't here for Israel's cause. And that's the thing that these crazy Americans are trying to push this narrative. We're trying to suck you all into some war. We're not trying to do anything. We're trying to defend you all. You're welcome. Because we're on the front lines of the Islamic jihadist caliphate that's trying to take over the world, y'all. So wake up and understand we're on the front lines. That's Zionist propaganda. No, it is not. It's reality. I live it. Don't tell me what I am or why I'm not, or the reality that I live or don't live in. When you're sitting comfortably in America, miserably in your snowstorm right now, if you're listening during the snowstorm, sorry for your poor, hard life, bro. But I'm fighting real terrorists that want to kill real people. And they want to kill you and me equally. They could care less if it's Jewish or non-Jewish. As long as it's not Islamic, they're going to kill them. And guess what? When they're done with us, they're going to they're already still also killing each other because you're not Muslim enough or good enough. And it's insane. And we're on the front lines of it. And to accuse us of dragging you or hurting America somehow, it is so ignorant. What Israel contributes to America is, and you can fact check me on this, to my knowledge, we contribute as an ally more than any other ally in the world. And you can fact check me on this. Contribute. Don't receive, contribute.
Oh, yeah. Well, with the defense partnerships and, the ROI on
Exactly.
everything and the
And
innovation.
this conversation that we're having is Israeli technology that was created, by the way. The cameras on your phone and you can talk to your grandkids. That's Israeli technology. Your grandma that got saved last week from that wonderful life-saving surgery that was developed by Israeli scientists in our medical facilities in Israel. You got to thank us, or rip that technology out of her body and let her bleed and die. You choose. I mean, do you understand the insanity? Without Israel, the world would be a much harder place, less convenient place. Would be terrible to my knowledge. Maybe, maybe not. It's debatable. But let's just say the world is a better place, fact, because of Israelis, because of what we contribute to the world. And to try to take the side of those who contribute only murder, death, and destruction instead of supporting us, you're the one who is insane, not me.
Right? Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for all of your insight. I think your perspective from the front line is so important, and there's a lot to learn,
Yeah.
and especially for the West, and a lot for us to learn about the threat of Islam. And so, just to end, I just wanted to ask you, is there anything you wanted to leave us with? And what are you looking for to see from the U.S. Israel relationship going forward? I know you had mentioned Gaza and, kind of the next steps with that, but just overall, I would love to know more about what you're
I
looking
think
to
just
see from
overall,
the partnership.
trust the Israelis that we know what we're talking about. It doesn't mean that we're perfect. It doesn't mean that we have it all figured out. So I'm not saying that. But just try to respect that we might know a little bit more about the reality on the ground that we're going through, and be a good ally and help us to help us and to help you. And let's not have strings attached of I'll be an ally, a fair weather friend of if and this and whatever and conditional. Um, because I think America and Israel have a lot to contribute to the world. We are on the front lines of defending the Judeo-Christian values that civilization is built on, of the Western world that we know it as we know it today. If it wasn't for the Jewish people, you wouldn't have a Bible, you wouldn't have Christians, and you wouldn't have law and order in Europe. You would have been still worshiping trees and rocks like the idol worshippers in India and in Asia that I've seen. And to be honest, when I see those poor people, I feel very bad for them that they actually believe that their God is this rock or this tree or some weird spirit stuff in the air and whatever. And you see how these people are lost, and you see how their cultures are backward, and you see how they have sickness and they have disease and they have all kinds of negative attributes from that. To me, it's a backward society. The Jewish people have contributed to the world, to the Western world as we know it, law and order through the God of Israel, who has given us his law for humanity. And that's what the West has benefited. So let's stand together to guard that, because that's the most important treasure, in my opinion, that we have and that the world has to contribute, is that we have God's law, and we should fight for that, and we should defend that, and quit fighting for humanism, and quit fighting for all these other isms, because they are failed ideologies. So Marxism isn't going to work in America. Socialism isn't going to work in America. Communism isn't going to work in America if we do it better than they did. Crap. No, just try good old fashioned religion. So Christians, be more Christian. Jews, be more Jewish. Both of y'all follow God wholeheartedly and contribute to society in the way God has created us to be, and to be a blessing to the rest of the world, and quit fighting against what, if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it, or however they say in the South. And that's my final words on that. In my opinion, it's really that simple.
And thank you for your insights. Really a lot to learn. And we look forward to seeing your news and updates from the front lines.
Thank you, ma'am.